Human rights advocates say the killing of disarmed Hun Sen forces during the 1997 coup d'etat amounted to extrajudicial killing and war crimes. Monitoring manager of Cambodia human rights organization Likido, Samat, says the coup was a tragic event that caused hundreds of deaths and injuries, and no one has ever been held accountable. He said we must remember such a bloody event in order to prevent similar human rights abuses from happening in the future. Three days after the coup, the special representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations for Human Rights in Cambodia, Thomas Hammarberg, declared that Hun Sen, the second Prime Minister, carried out the coup to overthrow the legally elected first Prime Minister, Prince Norodom Ranariddh. The reverberation of large and small arms exploding on July 5th and 6th caused chaos throughout the city. Thousands of Phnom Penh residents fled to other provinces for safety, and foreigners ran to the airport for the first flight out. Miss Ken Kim didn't make it out in time and became one of the victims who lost loved ones during the coup. Sitting on a bed in Calmet Hospital with her young injured son, Kim told ABC Australia TV that bullets killed two of her other sons. According to an investigation by the Office of the United Nations for Human Rights in Cambodia, in addition to the deaths and injuries caused by the clashes between the armed forces of the two prime ministers, at least 60 soldiers and high-ranking officials loyal to Prince Ranariddh were executed extrajudicially by armed forces loyal to Hun Sen. The UN investigative report defined extrajudicial execution as the act of killing a person without legal authorization while the person is disarmed and being detained by a state agency. The bloody coup started on July 2nd when Hun Sen's forces took control of the Navy base of the Hun Sen Party in Prek Taten. Among the high-ranking police and military officials of Hun Sen who were extrajudicially executed was Secretary of State of the Interior Sok Ho, who was shot to death while detained in the ministry. Other officials loyal to the prince who were tortured and then killed were General Sambat Chao, General Yom Kroich, General Din Prum, General Seng Hong Lee, General Buntorn Men, Richi Chut Chea, Colonel Virek Sok, Colonel Chan Savanarit Lang, and Colonel Sambat Hov. Even though the UN Office of Human Rights in Cambodia submitted one report after another to the government of Cambodia on the killings and urged an open investigation to hold the offenders accountable for their actions, nothing has been done in the 21 years since the coup. Government spokesman Pai Sapan recently rationalized that the events occurred a long time ago, so there wouldn't be any investigation. Further, he said that later, after the July clashes, the government issued a white book that explained everything.
ជាមួយនឹងឯសម្ដេចហ៊ុនសែនគឺមានឯកសម្បទាននយោបាយដើម្បីរក្សាសណ្ដាប់ធ្នាប់នយោបាយនិងផលប្រយោជន៍គ្រប់គឺសន្តិភាពហើយសេដ្ឋកិច្ចសភៅសគឺខាងរាជរដ្ឋាភិបាលតែបើបង្ក្រាបកម្លាំងអាណាធិបតេយ្យអានឹងជាឯកសារជាក់ស្ដែងបានខែ7ចេញតែក្នុងរៀនខែវិច្ឆិកាគឺមានសភៅសមួយមានពីរភាសាខ្មែរហើយនិងភាសាអង់គ្លេសដែលជាអំណះអំណាងបង្ក្រាបក្រុមអាណាធិបតេយ្យប្រដាប់អាវុធគឺថារឿងយើងស្មានអត់ដល់ទេ
After the coup, when Hun Sen took exclusive control of the government, issuing the so-called White Book was a way to justify to national and international communities his use of military force. The White Book defended his military action against the prince and his forces as necessary to prevent the return of Khmer Rouge troops. The book accused the prince of cooperating with the Khmer Rouge against Hun Sen and of importing illegal weapons. The prince never denied the allegation of importing weapons. He claimed that as the first prime minister, he had the right to purchase weapons. However, Hun Sen countered that could only be done through the Ministry of Defense. Nonetheless, Brad Adams, who was then with the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in Cambodia, says that no one imported more weapons than Hun Sen.
Hun Sen had official bodyguards through Regiment 70. But he decided that that wasn't enough, and he created a very large private army that had at least 1,000 people under its control in July 1997. That was probably better equipped, better armed, and better trained than any other unit in the country. And their job was not to protect the country. Their job was to do whatever Hun Sen ordered them to do. And those bodyguard units were also used in the coup. So Hun Sen cannot say that Hun Sen was importing arms illegally when he himself was doing it even more.
And express threats, fears for the safety of their family.
As for the allegation in the White Book that the prince led Khmer Rouge troops to Phnom Penh, Brad Adams says that he researched that issue but did not find any evidence of Khmer Rouge forces.
Well, Omium Tiang, Hun Sen's advisor at the time, called the United Nations Human Rights Office, where I was working, and said that we should go out to an army base outside of Phnom Penh where he had dozens of Khmer Rouge that would prove that Hun Sen was bringing Khmer Rouge into Phnom Penh. He said they had been captured at Tong Krasong. And so we sent a team out, of which I was a part of, and we interviewed all of these people separately. And not one of them was a Khmer Rouge member. Not one of them had come from En Long Veng, which is what the government claimed. And in fact, most of them said that they were from Pre Veng and Svai Rieng, which is where the Khmer Rouge were no longer operating, and said that they had been brought into Phnom Penh and offered jobs and had no idea why they had been captured. We explained to Omium Tiang that there were no Khmer Rouge, and he said nothing. He did not then try to maintain his claim that there were Khmer Rouge. He just looked embarrassed because we had caught him in a big lie.
Brad Adams added that it was actually Hun Sen who used Khmer Rouge forces. At least two former Khmer Rouge commanders, Keo Pong and Pun Piep, led their soldiers in joining the coup to overthrow the prince. Prince Ranariddh, hearing that Hun Sen was about to have him arrested, fled to France a day before the coup. Later he told then Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, that he was the victim and urged the UN not to recognize the post-coup government.
And so the United Nations must not recognize any government issue from the coup d'etat. It is a question of principle. And at the same time, we should not, if we recognize the regime, the new government issue from the coup d'etat, it will be a very bad example for the world.
In order to maintain peace, Prince Ranariddh had reluctantly agreed to the power-sharing agreement in 1993, despite winning the election, because Hun Sen was threatening to split Cambodia in two. CPP military and police forces had already ejected UNTAG, the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia, from 7 provinces. UNTAG was supposed to be leading a peaceful transition to power, so did nothing. Brad Adams said Ranariddh was no fan of the compromise, but even so, it was Hun Sen who actually launched the coup in 1997. He said the signs were already apparent in April of 1996 when the UN political representative in Cambodia, Benny Widjono, sent a cable to New York warning that Hun Sen intended to hold power by force.
Hun Sen was angry because Ranariddh in January of 1996, at a meeting of Phun Sen Pek, had decided that the coalition with Hun Sen was no longer working, and that instead of remaining in a coalition with Hun Sen after the 1998 elections, that Phun Sen Pek would try to win the elections and become the majority party. Hun Sen had never accepted the idea of elections determining who would be in government. Hun Sen believed that the CPP had the right and should always remain in government, whether through an election or through force. And so Hun Sen started talking to other members of the CPP about using force to get rid of Phun Sen Pek. And that is what Benny Widjono was reporting back to New York as early as April 1996.
Adams says at that time, the president of the Cambodian People's Party, Chia Sim, and the Minister of Defense, Tay Ban, did not support Hun Sen's plan to launch a coup. But that did not deter Hun Sen. However, in response to a question asked by a foreign reporter after his successful overthrow of the prince, Hun Sen accused the prince of using force first.
That seemed to be, sir, the use of force. Do you regret the use of force? That's what they seem to be complaining about. Do you regret the use of force? I
am afraid not. They use, not us. Why you continue to say like that? Ranariddh use the force. I don't use the force. I use the force to prevent them. You go to a long way yourself.
You can go to a long way. Shooting by Pol Pot. Thank you, sir.
It was the Paris Peace Accords in 1991 that ended the Cambodian-Vietnamese War and communist control over the country. The accords also established the mechanism for elections in 1993. However, Brad Adams says the 1997 coup destroyed the progress made in those elections. UNTAG had organized the 93 elections to be the beginning of freedom for the Cambodian people, and those freedoms would later be enshrined in the national constitution in the same year. Brad Adams, who is now executive director of Human Rights Watch in Asia, says that without that freedom, people wouldn't have had hope, and that it was UNTAG that brought hope to Cambodians at that time.
And people had no freedom. And when you have no freedom, you don't really have much hope. And UNTAG brought unprecedented freedom. It brought freedom of the press, freedom of assembly and association, the right to form NGOs, the right to form political parties, and it brought an election that was supervised by the United Nations. And people thought, as imperfect as their leaders were, I think most people thought Hun Sen and Ranariddh were imperfect leaders, that the country would start making progress. But the coup took Cambodia right back to those dark days where powerful people decided to hold on to power through force instead of through the will of the people. And so that was very depressing for a lot of Cambodians. I remember so many of my Cambodian friends telling me how depressed and upset they were, that they thought that their leaders wouldn't do this anymore. But they saw that, in fact, they still were doing this. And we haven't had a free and fair election since. There has not been a free and fair election in 98, 2003, 2008, 2013. They've all been tainted very badly. And so we still haven't had a government formed by the people, by the people's votes in Cambodia.
Adams went on to say that even though it's been more than 20 years since the extrajudicial executions were carried out, it is still very important to identify the criminals and related people and sentence them. He says it's crucial for two main reasons. One is personal and one is political.
The personal reason is that if your family member had been arrested, stripped of his clothes, handcuffed, and then taken to a location, usually outside of Phnom Penh, and then shot in the head and killed, you would want there to be justice. You would want the people who did that to be held accountable. And I think you would never stop wanting that. I mean, that is how most human beings react. They always want justice in cases like this. I personally was working for the United Nations Human Rights Office at the time, and I dug some of those bodies up. These people were taken out outside of Phnom Penh, some cases to Kampong Speu. Pick Nil was one place where I ended up digging up the body of a man who we found only wearing shorts. He was handcuffed, and he had a bullet in his head, and he had been buried in a very shallow grave, which I, as a United Nations human rights investigator, found, and we were able to identify the body later.
Adams says that in addition to the personal desire for justice, there is also a political and social need for justice, because those who commit such crimes will keep doing so if no one is holding them accountable.
There was complete impunity for people who were working for Hun Sen during that coup. And a lot of the people who were involved in killings then are now very powerful. Just for example, General Chap Pickaday was identified as being responsible for some of the extrajudicial executions after the coup. He was only a colonel then. He is now a full general. He is very close to Hun Sen. And what did we find? We found in 2014, when there were demonstrations after the election, that his soldiers were involved in repressing the demonstrations. So some of these very people responsible for the abuses during the coup continue to be responsible for abuses now. And we have to end the culture of impunity, which says that if you are powerful or if you work for Hun Sen or you're a senior official, you can get away with murder.
Both Likado Human Rights Monitoring Manager Samat and Brad Adams of Human Rights Watch think that seeking justice for victims in the present time is a tough job, but that it's important to not lose hope or give up the effort. Adams says that disseminating information about human rights abuses and reminding people about the abuses is very important no matter what the circumstances.
Things can change, and nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows when that's going to happen. But I can tell you in Burma and in Malaysia, nothing would have changed if people hadn't continued to publish the facts, hadn't continued to speak the truth to powerful people, hadn't identified perpetrators of human rights violations, people who were corrupt, and hadn't kept campaigning and being active. So I don't know how Cambodia's story is going to turn out, but I do believe that evil people who commit human rights abuses and are extremely corrupt will be held accountable someday. They will lose power, and all the work that very brave Cambodians are doing, including journalists and human rights workers, will have impact someday. I don't know when it's going to
Adams went on to say the international and national human rights communities consider the killing at that time a crime that violated the laws of war. He said that if the loss of lives during the coup was the result of clashes in the battlefield, or if the killing was accidental, it's exempted. However, when the victims are arrested, blindfolded, handcuffed behind their backs, and shot in the head, it is a war crime, in addition to being immoral, disgusting, and inhumane. According to international law, some types of crimes do not have a statute of limitations, meaning no matter how long ago the crime was committed, the criminals can still be prosecuted. Those include war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. It is that law that provided the legal basis for creating the Khmer Rouge Tribunal, which is currently trying former leaders of the Khmer Rouge regime, despite the fact that their crimes occurred more than 39 years ago. Likido and Human Rights Watch say even though the current government is not willing to investigate and bring charges against the perpetrators of the coup, Cambodians and the human rights community must keep reminding society about the severity of these human rights abuses, that it's necessary to send a warning message to human rights abusers as well as prevent the impunity which has allowed some to get away with their crimes. On July 29, 2018, 21 years after the coup, Cambodia again held national elections. In the lead-up to the elections, the Cambodian government, still under the control of Prime Minister Hun Sen and his ruling CPP, began an assault on the opposition, civil society, and the media. Members of parliament representing the opposition were beaten unconscious in broad daylight in front of the parliament. Opposition and NGO members were imprisoned. 32 independent radio transmissions and an independent newspaper were shut down. Other media were muzzled. The president of the opposition CNRP, Kem Sokha, was imprisoned and his party was outlawed. 2 journalists from Radio Free Asia were imprisoned and charged with espionage.